Hello and welcome to the EPRI Current. I'm your host, Samantha Gilman, and today we're going to be talking about a topic that we hear about a lot these days, AI and data centers. Right now, we're on the cusp of this new era of innovation that has the real potential to enhance people's daily lives and drive economic growth. But unlocking these benefits requires a different way of thinking about how we build and serve our powered infrastructure. So to address the rising demand and maintain that reliable energy that's expected for our stakeholders, we're going to be talking about a new EPRI collaboration called DCFlex. I'm joined by EPRI's Vice President of Electrification and Sustainable Energy Strategy, David Porter, and Briana Kobor, who is the Head of Energy Market Innovation at Google. Thank you, both of you, for taking the time to talk to me today. So I want to give each of you an opportunity to just quickly tell our listeners who you are, what you do at your respective companies, but also how you ended up here. How did you find yourself here at this intersection of energy and AI and data centers? Because 5 years ago, it may not have been something we were talking about quite as much in every single episode of the EPRI Current. So I'll start with you, Briana. Tell us a little bit about you.
Happy to. And thanks so much for having me on the show today. I'm really excited to have this conversation alongside David about this really exciting initiative. So I'm our Head of Energy Market Innovation at Google. I like the way you framed up the introduction because I personally never expected to find myself working for a large tech company. I've spent my career in and out of regulated utility ecosystems, working alongside our vertically integrated utilities to advance clean energy, new customer programs. Throughout my career, I spent time in consulting and the nonprofit sector. And it was really a surprise to me to find that tech is really, I would say, the eye of the storm of energy innovation these days. And so I work on our data center team here at Google. And with our energy team, we serve to supply clean, reliable, and affordable electricity for Google's growing data center fleet.
David, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Samantha, for the opportunity to be here today. And Briana, thanks for being part of this. Google's a great partner for us on this DCFlex effort, and we're really glad to have you on board for that. My career, Samantha, I've been around the energy business pretty much my entire career. And if you'd asked me a decade or two ago, if I thought I'd be sitting here talking about something like data centers and the impacts on the grid, I would have told you no. As someone who's been in and around that business for a long time, most of the time, grid operations, reliability, resilience has not been so tied to large point loads as it is now. And when it was more industrial type customers and applications that in large part had the ability to interrupt loads during emergencies. Tech companies like Google and others don't have that luxury to just turn their operations on and off without consideration for what they're delivering as a product. So it's a really new paradigm for the tech companies and the utilities, and trying to find new ways to work together to solve the challenges and take advantage of the opportunities that are there collectively.
So let's set the stage for our listeners on this topic. Briana, from the perspective of a hyperscaler, what are some of the challenges that the industry has faced with this rapid growth of AI and data center expansion to serve that?
As everyone who listens to this podcast is aware, we are seeing scaled increase in demand from data centers and other parts of industry. And I think one of the things to really reflect on is how important data centers have become to our daily lives. We're recording this podcast on a digital platform, which is going to be delivered digitally to people's homes and computers for their listening pleasure. And, every hour of every day, we really are interacting with the internet and with digital ecosystems in a way that relies on data center services. I like to think of data centers as the backbone of our modern economy. And so as we continue to rely on these types of services, we continue to see benefits from those services, both in terms of energy usage. So data center started growing in demand in the last decade or so as people moved from on-premise servers to the cloud. That's actually been a highly efficient, from an electricity usage standpoint, innovation. And now we're seeing adoption of those services continue to increase. And so Google's been building in the AI and ML space for a decade or more. And now we're really starting to see market uptick. And with that comes a lot of challenges. The scale and speed with which the tech industry operates is on a different time spectrum than the electricity ecosystem. And so what we're faced with is, I like to call it a growing pain between where our tech companies need to be to serve our customers and to serve this demand, and what we're really capable of doing as an electric industry. So as I mentioned, I spent my entire career in the regulated utility ecosystem. Moving on the realm of 5, 10, 15 years is often lightning speed in terms of innovation. And so what we're faced with here is really a big challenge. And so the electric industry has had a number, I would say, latent issues, things like aging infrastructure, the need to build increased long-haul transmission, clogged generation queues that have really been around and being tackled for some number of years. But now the urgency with which we need to take on those challenges is even greater. And so I think that's what's really building the need for, and I think mutual desire, both from customers, from stakeholders, and from the utility ecosystem to really start to innovate. And I think demand flexibility is a really important part of that.
So something we've already mentioned, DCFlex, but we haven't really explained what it is yet. David, can you give our listeners an overview of EPRI's DCFlex initiative and the benefits you expect to have?
Yeah, and Briana could not have framed it better. She laid out the collective problem statements there very well. So from EPRI's viewpoint, it's probably been about a year and a half ago where the genesis for this initiative started to take place. And the point Briana made around a timing mismatch between what the tech companies are doing, how quickly they can build a new data center facility at scale, much larger than what the utilities are used to dealing with historically, and the utilities' ability to provide that level of service in a similar time frame. There's a severe mismatch there today. So that was problem number one that we set out to try to solve. Tied to that is something else that Briana mentioned, and that's demand flexibility. And with where the grid is today, having the ability to have large flexible loads to improve the overall operation of the grid is key. And we believe that data centers can be that large flexible point load, not all the time, not for an entire year, but in times when the grid really needs some assistance to meet the loads, that's when it's really important. And that's the heart of DCFlex. So we set up this project with 4 main work streams in mind. The first was around flexible data center designs, and that's understanding the different flexibility characteristics, particularly related to workloads inside the data center for the different types of key data centers out there. A cloud data center and the load profile there doesn't look the same as an AI data center. There's big differences in how they operate and what they can and can't do with compute load inside the data center. Once we understand those flexibility characteristics and we test some of them in the field, and I know we're going to talk about some of these demonstration projects a bit later, then it's our job to work on transformational utility programs so that we have that flexibility that's available from the data centers. How do we then complement that with utility programs and incentives that want to engage the data centers, as well as take advantage of market structures and those differences as you go to different markets around the US and the world? The third piece is giving utilities better tools and algorithms from a forecasting standpoint so that they can not only better prepare in the short term to serve loads like Google brings in their data centers, but also incorporate the flexibility characteristics of that into their real-time planning as they go forward, which that kind of thing has typically been discounted by utility planners over time. So that's a big part of what we're trying to show with our demonstrations too, that they can deliver on that flexibility. And then the fourth piece has to do with what we've called data center informed energy supply. which then gets to what can we do with the needs of data centers and that timing in terms of front of the meter or behind the meter or bridge solutions to meet their needs in a timely manner, particularly in places they may need to build for business purposes, but the transmission capacity may not be there, and it may not be there for quite some time. So how do we bridge that gap so that those companies can get up and running and help grow the economy as part of that process?
So amongst these conversations around data centers, the idea that a data center can become an asset to the electric grid is unique. Briana, how will this collaboration help you expand your operations more rapidly to better serve your customers?
I think that if we've learned anything as a company in the last 5 years, it's that collaboration with the energy ecosystem is absolutely key. It's inherent in how we approach our clean energy goals. It's inherent in how we approach every single market in which we operate. And so, David, I like that you highlighted a little bit of the difference between, we call them the product areas, the different types of products that run in our data centers, because I think that that's something that's really at the heart of this conversation on flexibility. And so Google's fleet runs everything from the customer-facing products that everyone knows and loves, things like Google Maps, Google Translate, YouTube. There's a number of products that we run that we've actually long been leveraging flexibility on in service of our clean energy goals. And we also have a lot of enterprise services for end use customers through our cloud products. And so as you think about demand flexibility, the ability for a given site to shift operations in time and location is really going to be highly dependent. And I think that's an important takeaway for folks as well, is that data center demand flexibility is a really critical tool in the toolkit, but it's only going to be part of the picture for what we need to solve. And so that's what we're excited about in participating in this DCFlex initiative, is it gives us the ability to really roll up our sleeves and think in collaboration with our utilities. You also highlighted, David, how it's sometimes difficult for our utility partners to feel like they can rely on demand side resources alongside supply side resources. And this is the moment where we really need to find the models that get us past that logjam, because we simply cannot build supply side resources at the scale and speed necessary. And so that becomes our really important marching orders as an industry to figure out how we design programs and how we contract around what that can look like to really unlock that value.
So I want to go back to something that David had mentioned earlier. So EPRI is working with a number of companies around these demonstration sites to test the flexible capabilities of data center operations. Can you tell us a little bit about the first flexibility hub sites and what we hope to learn from them?
We've reached at this point, Samantha, an opportunity to start with 5 flex hubs, if you will, our initial 5 projects, and I'll share a little bit of information about each of those. The first 2 that I'll mention are around that compute flexibility and the workload flexibility. One of those is a project that we're doing with Briana and her team at Google, and I'm going to let her talk about that because she can address that far better than I can. But the second one is with a data center that's in Arizona, working with Arizona Public Service, Salt River Project, and Emerald AI, where we'll be able to scale down the full load on that data center by 25%, which is very important because it's several hundred megawatts. I think it's really critical to say one other thing about these demonstration projects too. These are all taking place in production facilities. We're not doing lab tests. Google and Briana and the other data centers that are participating, they're taking a lot of risk in these projects while we test these things out. And I think that's really important to note, and I give them a lot of credit for being able to step out there and take that opportunity to improve things for everybody in the long run. We have 2 other projects that are similar to that, but different. And they're looking at providing ancillary services back to the grid. One of those is taking place in France with RTE and Schneider, and the other will be in Texas with ERCOT. And then the last of the first set of demonstrations, and we'll have more coming, but it's going to be multiple sites around the U.S., and we will be testing renewable fuels, specifically hydrotreated vegetable oil, or HVO, as a substitute drop-in fuel for the backup generators that run on diesel at all of these data centers. Because there's some opportunities there for us to do heavy monitoring and verification on air quality impacts from HVO versus diesel. Right now, from a regulatory standpoint, they're treated the same, but HVO is a much cleaner fuel. We may be able to enable longer runtimes with that versus diesel. So as we look to all of that cross-section of projects, there's kind of 3 or 4 key things we want to get out of it. One, when we talk about the computational flexibility, can we deliver on that? Can we reduce the load? And most importantly, can Google and others continue to get their products out the door in the way that they need to when we enact those load reductions? The second piece of that is looking at the ability to flex those loads for varying different periods of time, depending on what the utility programs in place might look like, to see how things work for shorter and longer duration, how that impacts the data centers. The ancillary services piece and looking at in different market structures is important as part of a result. And then obviously the longer run times for diesel gensets bring a whole new level of flexibility to the data centers in the grid if we're able to pull that off.
Well, Briana, that's exciting that Google is part of these first DCFlex demonstrations. What is Google hoping to learn from this? And then how do you anticipate working that into current or future data center plans?
Yeah, absolutely. We are very thrilled to be part of this additional round of demonstration projects alongside our partners at Duke Energy. And so what we're going to be doing is leveraging the flexibility products that we've built internally and bring them in collaboration with Duke to help us to design the programs of the future. So we're going to be working with Duke engineers. The work has already started to figure out the operational, the communications protocols, and then eventually the program design that will enable their system planners to really rely on our flexibility as a resource. And so at our Lenore, North Carolina site, we will be implementing a purely software-based solution. So nothing that we're doing in this demonstration is related to backup generators or batteries. It's all based on internal computing algorithms that deprioritize non-urgent compute tasks. So things like processing YouTube videos, adding words to Google Translate and the like are able to be delayed. And then in some cases, shifted across the fleet because we have a number of operating data centers in the region to respond to demand signals from our utility. And so this work really builds on work that we've been doing for the last 5 years internally at Google and in service of our clean energy objectives. We've never had the use case to bring it to market at scale, and now we are seeing that use case emerge. And so we started in 2020. We had recently announced our 24/7 carbon-free energy initiative. So moving beyond a 100% renewable energy goal as a company, which is more of an annual matching exercise, to something that really resembles hourly operations of the grid in a more meaningful way. What that did is it said to our engineers that we have a lot of intermittent renewables in the portfolio. And so how can we start to flex our demand on an hourly basis in response to what was a marginal carbon emissions signal? So we've been able to take that and over time really iterate on it to build it into something that looks a lot more like a demand flexibility project.
Great. So I wanted to mention for our listeners that we did an episode on 24/7 CFE last year. So for those of you who are interested in learning more about what that is, please look at that episode. We'll also drop the link in this episode description so you can learn more about that. But Briana, I know you got more to say. I can tell.
Yeah, I just wanted to share with folks the work that we have been doing and kind of where we are in the process, because this is really an opportunity to bring us from the pilot stage to something, to really shape the industry from a program design basis. And so building on our carbon aware computing that we've done since 2020, shifting, based on this marginal emissions signal, what we've been able to do is actually respond to extreme events in collaboration with our utility partners. So we did this during the European energy crisis in the winter of 2022 2023 throughout our European fleet, we were able to leverage this capability to reduce demand on a daily basis during peak periods, enabling energy security for the continent. And we also have been participating in similar programs in Taiwan. And so with Taiwan Power Company, we participate in their summer reliability program, again, leveraging this flexibility at our sites to reduce during peak periods. And then taking that kind of more programmatic work, we've been able to collaborate with a few utilities in the United States, in Oregon, in Nebraska, and in the Southeast to respond to extreme weather events. And so this looks very, I would say, unsophisticated today, because what it does is it lacks that program design. So a lot of this is really email-based, phone call-based, individual relationship-based. But we have been able to significantly reduce demand at our sites during both extreme winter and summer events alongside utility partners. And so what we're really excited to do and learn from this demonstration project is to work alongside Duke and hopefully other utilities throughout the DCFlex cohort to think about how we can take those capabilities and really productize them, bring them to, outside of Google incubation to something that can really be relied on throughout the utility ecosystem.
And just to give folks an idea of how many, those companies, utilities are part of DCFlex to opportunity to collaborate with, real quick, David, how many companies are currently in DCFlex?
As of today, 45, Samantha, but the good news is that changes at least on a weekly basis and continues to rise, which gives us the opportunity to do even more innovative things and do additional demonstration projects. So we are still taking new entrants at any time for this project.
Excellent. And I agree that it is going up every week because I am on those emails, seeing those logos coming in, going up on the website. So it's great that it's continuing to grow even almost a year after the initial kickoff. But David, you mentioned earlier that there's going to be another round of demonstration sites. What other factors are those demonstrations going to be looking at compared to what you just mentioned and Briana mentioned?
The beauty of this collaborative that we have, Samantha, it's such a great collection of stakeholders that all have some vested interest around the data centers in particular. There's a lot of industries and businesses that touch that to a point that Briana made earlier and how much that drives the economy overall. So bringing this group of currently 45 companies together, and we bring the advisory groups together, the ideas and the innovation that come out of those folks is amazing. And there's also a lot of other companies that are early stage companies, new ventures, that are looking for opportunities to demonstrate their technology or their approach. And we have a platform for them to do that as well. So we are wide open to ideas, but we will build as we go forward on what we started with. And there's a couple of key things out of these initial projects that we'll continue to drive on. One, when we look at that workload flexibility, and to some points Briana made, sometimes Google may be getting signals by carrier pigeon about when they need to shed some load at a facility. I'm being facetious, but sometimes it really is the relationship, as Briana said today. But we've got to be able to test now beyond what we're doing in the initial phases of demonstration, where we're a day ahead or maybe even longer to test this. And in these initial stages, that's really important because it's important to the workload inside Briana's and other facilities, and making sure that we're really testing the right things without trying to do it in an emergency situation in a production facility. But we need to also test the agility of that going forward and making sure that we can do things in a shorter time frame. Because as we all know, grid emergencies don't necessarily light up a day ahead of time so we can prepare for them. Sometimes they just happen. The second piece of that, and this is something else that Briana touched on, our ability to create standard communications and controls protocols so that companies like Google that are global companies, she listed out a number of worldwide utilities that they're working with. they don't want to have to figure out how to communicate and take signals from all these different utilities in a different way. Part of what we're driving with DCFlex and our demonstrations is to develop those standard protocols that then can work with Google and their peers and other large loads for this going forward. So it gets to be much more seamless, and we can make flexibility for large point loads more accessible to more types of companies and better support the grid. And the last thing we'll really be pushing on in the next stage is also incorporating bridge as well as some different backup scenarios and solutions using things like solar and storage and wind and other technologies, something that's beyond backup diesel or other alternatives that can be front or back of the meter.
Great. Well, David, Briana, thank you so much for joining me today to talk about DCFlex. There's a lot going on. I foresee another episode in our future talking about DCFlex one day down the road, talking about the results of all these great projects. But before we close out the episode, I want to get each of you an opportunity to leave any final thoughts with our listeners. So, David, any final thoughts you want to leave?
I would say, and this kind of echoes some things that Briana said earlier, the AI revolution is really our next industrial revolution, if you will. And it's really changing our daily lives. When you couple that with the clean energy transition that's underway in the utility industry, it's an intersection of great opportunity and challenge. And I feel very fortunate that EPRI has a seat at the table with companies like Google and their peers and others that are trying to drive change and build on the opportunities that are in front of us and use that to overcome challenges. This is a really exciting time, and maybe the most exciting time in the energy industry in my career. So I'm really pleased with where we sit with this DCFlex collaboration and opportunity.
And Briana, we'll give you the last word.
Yeah, just echoing the appreciation. The challenges, as David mentioned, are really unparalleled. But I feel like we have such an opportunity, especially as we think about the intersection of demand and decarbonization. Demand flexibility can play such a critical role in taking these high load factor loads. And if we can really start to reduce on the peak, we start to see massive benefits for all ratepayers, for better utilization of assets, for better integration of renewables that really help us to get to that bridge where we have at scale, clean capacity resources. What I always like to tell the team, because, we're investing in enhanced geothermal, advanced nuclear, all sorts of new technologies. Those are still a couple of years out. But the only clean, flexible resource that is available today at scale is energy efficiency and demand response. And so finding a way for Google to really play a collaborative role in that ecosystem is something that gets me up every morning.
Amazing. Well, David, Briana, thanks so much. And to our listeners, thanks for tuning in today. And with that, we'll talk to you next time.